Would you class yourself as fatherless?
Yeah. Do you class yourself as fatherless?
It's weird because obviously I had a father figure
Mm-hmm.
until like 10.
Okay, yeah.
Because I obviously thought he was my dad.
Yeah.
But now, yeah. But even then, like, he wasn't a father, if that makes sense. Like, he wasn't like, when I think of father, I think provider, caregiver, like someone who just overall shows like protection.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think he did that because some of the situations was put in, that was all at stake.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So, and then obviously when I found out that he wasn't my dad, it was like relief. But at the same time, then I was like, who am I? Who's my dad?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do now with this information? Where do I go? Where do I start in finding him?
Mm-hmm.
Type thing.
What do you think your stepdad did after then? So there was certain things that you're saying he didn't necessarily fulfill those aspects of a dad.
Yeah.
Is there any aspects that you feel like he did fill?
To be honest, like a lot of the time he was, how do I explain it? He was a fun person, probably I'd put it.
Okay, got you.
But he was never there enough to see that. And I feel like because most of my memories of him were more negative than positive, it's hard to remember positives. Like, I think in any situation, you always remember the negatives rather than the positive. So when I look back, I feel like all my memories of good things were kind of like gone and covered with the bad things, if that makes sense. To like round it up, I think fun. In the good times, he gave my mom love. Maybe it was too much love. That makes sense.
Too much love?
Yeah, as in like more of a controlling love.
Okay.
And then that obviously when you step away and you grow up, you're like, now you look back, you're like, that wasn't right, this wasn't right.
Okay.
So I think, yeah, I took definitely more negatives than positives from that. Yeah.
Okay. Was anyone a protector to you?
My mum, probably.
Okay.
I think my mum and my older sister, like as in my older sisters that are like 27 and 26.
Yeah.
But yeah, because not my older sister, the one below, that's how, because there's so many of them, she was like a second mom.
Okay.
Because obviously my mom, she had 6 kids, she was busy, she was doing everything. She was like, if I come in late, she would literally come down and get me. She'd be like, what are you doing out at this time? Like,
your sister would?
My sister would. Okay. So she was like, how many years? 5 years older than me. So when I was like 15, she was like 20. She'd just come down like, what are you doing? Get in the house. Do you know what I mean? So she was more of like, and say if I had any problems with people, you know, when you're young, you run your mouth and you get yourself in trouble. Like my sisters would always be them people. Like my sisters have fought for me, as in like physical fights.
Literally?
Yeah. But my mum's definitely a protector in that sense.
Okay. So at that time with your sister telling you to come in and all of that, did you appreciate her role as a protector or was it more an annoyance?
I was annoyed. I was like, who are you to tell me? And I think because you're both young, like at the time, I think when you're like that young, you feel like your siblings are a lot older, but they're not.
Yeah.
But then you get to that age, like I'm her age now, like I'm 21. And I'm like, I wasn't old at all. But yeah, like I hated it at the time, but now I look back, I'm like, the bar was dangerous. Like she was doing the right thing.
So then back to your dad. What's your current relationship with your dad?
We don't have one.
At all?
At all.
How long has it been like that for?
We've never had a relationship. I think because he always knew about me because he was in my life when I was very young, like a baby.
Okay.
So obviously I found out that my stepdad wasn't my dad when I was 10 or 9 or 10. And then obviously from the age of 10 to 18, didn't know who he was. I always had like a vision in my head of what he'd be like. And then when I found out who he was, I was like, this is nothing like I'd imagine.
Okay.
Because obviously you look at your mom and then your dad and then you think, what traits my mom doesn't have, I must get them from my dad. But I don't think I'm like either of them, which is really weird. If that makes sense. But like, I don't know my dad on a personal level. Yeah. But the stories I've heard, like I'm really close to my brother and the stuff he tells me, I'm like, we can't be the same.
I get that though, because I don't feel like I'm like my mum or my dad really either. Not that I know too much about what my dad
Yeah.
was like, but I do feel like I always kind of wonder like what made me how I am.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you think it's harder, because it's like sounds similar the way, do you think it's harder to figure out who you are just because you don't have the knowledge of your dad? For me, it's harder to figure out, like, I don't know him, so how am I meant to base any of this? Do you know what I mean?
So I feel so with me. I don't feel like I've ever felt like I've had to figure out who I am. I feel like I've always known who I am. So my question was more like, I wonder how I am like this. So
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that.
So I've got certain traits. Like I like who I am for like the most part.
Yeah,
I'm not perfect,
same.
but I like who I am. So when I'm around my family and it's like, okay, my mom's not like this, my nan's not like this, my uncle's not like this, my brother's not like this. I don't believe my dad was like this. So I find I would love to be able to like backtrack into my life and find out what was the moment that made me become
The way you are.
that person.
I get you. I feel like it's so mad how similar it is, because it was the same with me when I was young. I was like, I'm not like anyone. Like, out of my family's so loud, and they're so like, not boisterous, but they're like very, if you come into my family home, they'll grill you. They're like, oh, why'd you do this, do this, do this, do this, do this?
Oh yeah.
And then I'm just like, hi, it's nice to meet you. Like, very reserved. But my mom's a very extravagant person. My sisters, they're all the same. But for me, I feel like I was always quiet. Childhood. I think my teen years, I kind of went off a bit. But then, like, I've always been reserved. And I'm like, none of my family's like this. My dad must be like this.
Okay.
But then he's not like that. So I'm like, what made me like that? Like how you just said, it was completely the exact same thing.
Do you feel like you have any answers to what potentially made you like that?
I don't know. I feel like a lot of it is just like a coping mechanism. Because like from my childhood, I was just very quiet. In a lot of the situations, I would stay quiet. If that makes sense.
Like bad situations?
Yeah, I would be like very quiet. Or if I did speak up, I'd be very emotional. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, got you.
But my other sisters, they're very loud. And then like even my siblings from my dad's side, they're quite loud. The ones that I do have a relationship. So I'm like, I don't know where I came from, if that makes sense.
Are you like, okay, that's calm? Or is it like you feel a bit lost because everyone else is kind of, they have the same trait that kind of links them, whereas you feel like you don't have the trait that probably links everyone else, you don't have that trait?
I think so. I don't know, I feel like I'm just the one that's always shying away, if that makes sense. Like, even, I don't know, in secondary school, there's this girl, we got into an argument, and then my sister's always there, like, don't talk to my sister like that, because I'm very reserved. I'm like, I'm not getting involved. I don't like drama. I don't like conflict. I will run from conflict. But my family, they're the opposite. Like, someone looks at my mum wrong, she'll go to fight them. Like, same with some of my sisters. They're like, what are you looking at? It's go time. Okay. But with me, I'm just like, no, I'm not getting involved. I don't want to be a part of this. Let me leave, because I'll get very uncomfortable. But yeah, I feel like it is a bit of, I always wondered why I was so quiet when I was younger, but it was just normal to me. It's like the norm, so.
Okay. And did it make you feel like the odd one out?
Yeah, I always say that I was the odd one out. Like, even if I look back at like photos and stuff, I can tell that I was just uncomfortable. And I think because I wasn't personally like anyone, like personality-wise. I wasn't attitude like anyone. And then I think because I didn't look like certain members of my family, I was just like, I remember asking my mum when I was younger if I was adopted, and she was like, do not be silly, like, I've had all my children. But I think that was just because I've seen so many differences compared to similarities.
Yeah.
So that's why when I was younger, I always ruled it out of, I must be like my dad. My dad must be calm, he must be collected, he must be this kind of like role model that I kind of find like familiar things with.
Yeah.
But no.
So at the moment where you kind of got more information about your dad and you realized that you weren't like your dad, how was that for you emotionally?
It was hard because I think when I found out how close by he was.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived in the same town, literally like a street away from each other.
Also,
All this stuff. Like, I've walked past him in the street, and I think when I found out all this information about him, I was just completely like took back, because I was like, oh, when it's kind of like disappointing.
mm-hmm.
As sad as that may be on him, it's not like a personal thing, but it's like when you're young, you paint this picture. You're like, oh, when I meet my dad, it's gonna be good. I'm gonna finally have that relationship, but then you don't have anything at
Mm-hmm.
all, and it's disappointing.
And so that's disappointing, because it's like, all right, I don't have the connection with my dad. But then, like, inside your house, does that make you feel more alone within your house now? Because it's like the dream of a connection is kind of gone now.
Yeah. It does make me feel alone, just because obviously I have a different dad to my siblings.
Mm-hmm.
So my younger siblings, they grew up with, even if he was a bad dad, they still had that knowledge
Yeah.
of who he was,
Yeah.
where he come from, like the way he is, if that makes sense. But because I'm not close to my dad, I can't figure out maybe what went wrong in his childhood that made him not want a relationship with his children, or the dynamic. So
Yeah.
I think for me it was more so like, I feel alone because I can't talk to anyone. I can talk to my siblings, but they're not going to understand the situation.
Yeah.
And I can't talk to many people because it's a weird situation. Like, not many people relate to that.
So now, have you been able to have someone that you can talk to and kind of get everything that you think off your chest, or is it still something that you kind of just deal with alone or internally?
I think I deal with a lot of it alone.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously I speak to my brother now, and he actually lives with my dad.
Okay.
So that's like a really weird situation. He's the only person out of my dad's family that I have a close relationship with.
Okay.
So I think with him, it's more so like he kind of tells me how it was with him growing up. So I kind of live that experience through what he tells me.
Okay.
I think at the beginning I was very, very envious, because I was like, oh, you grew up with him, you did this, you did that. Till I understood that maybe him growing up with him wasn't his childhood he planned.
Yeah.
Because he obviously has trauma, he has all this stuff from growing up with him. So in some ways I think maybe it was good that I wasn't around him.
Yeah.
But then obviously you still think, oh, but he's half of me. You always have love for them, no matter what they've done, because they brought you into this earth, whether it's negative or positive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I think it'll be something until you get clarity, like I think until I sit down with my dad and have that conversation, I will never understand.
Is that something you want to do?
I do want to do that, but it's difficult, I think.
Is it something he doesn't want to do then?
I think the main thing holding us back is obviously he's been apart from me now for like 20 years.
Yeah.
And maybe the dynamic when he left was hard for him to come back into, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And then obviously growing up, like from what I hear from my brother, there's a very big, it's more to do with culture wise, because obviously he's married, he has his children. So me, I would have been conceived out of marriage.
Okay.
So for my family to be accepting of me, it would be like, but he did this out of marriage, he stepped out of his religion, did all these things. So I think for him, it's more so judgment.
Okay.
So he doesn't want to get judged by family members and all this stuff. He's mainly just protecting himself, which isn't fair, because
Yeah.
you brought a human into this world, so you should explain
Yeah.
all these things.
Have you asked him to have a conversation with him?
I don't have any contact with him at all. Like, me and my brother spoke about it, and he kind of tells me, because he lives with him, he knows the type of person he is.
Okay.
So how my brother actually found out about me is because my dad pointed me out on the street. So they went past me in a car and he said, that's your sister, make sure you look after her. So to me, I'm like, how do you know how I look after 20 years, but you haven't tried to come up to me when you've seen me on the street? You must have been kind of watching me grow up to know how I look after 20 years. Do you know what I mean? Like, you left when I was a baby. Like,
Yeah.
you must know something. So that's what's confusing for me.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously my brother tells me, oh yeah, he would speak to you, but the family members, this and this. Like, even when I meet my brother now, we have to hide. Like,
So your dad doesn't.
no, my dad doesn't know, and our family doesn't know that we meet.
Okay.
So it's a very weird dynamic. That's why
Yeah.
it's hard to tell people, because they're like,
Mhm.
what do you mean? Like, no one understands that, because everyone has a very, not so much nowadays, but when I was in school and stuff, everyone has a very traditional, like, mom, dad, married.
Mhm.
But yeah,
That's mad.
it's a weird situation.
So since being aware of who your dad is visually, have you seen him or walked past him?
Yeah.
And what was that encounter like for you? Like,
But it's funny, there's this one supermarket,
Mhm.
and I would always, every time I go past in the car, walking, I would always kind of see my family members, because I know what my family members look like, because I've got photos.
Okay.
But my dad, I remember one time I was in that supermarket, because it was close to where I lived at the time, and we literally walked past each other, but he was on the phone. So I was like, do you know what I mean? Like, you know what I look like.
Mm-hmm.
You must have saw me, because we was in the same shop.
Mhm.
But I feel like he acted kind of oblivious to the situation, to not face it head on. That makes sense.
Mhm.
Because I wanted to, in these times, I just freeze. I'm like, what do I do? Like, this is what I've been waiting for, but also at the same time, how do I approach it?
Yeah.
I think you're always scared, because they've left once, they might just turn around and say, what are you doing? Like, why are you approaching me? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's kind of that fear, like, they're going to just abandon that situation like they did back then.
Mm-hmm.
For me anyway, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a weird situation. But now I don't go to that supermarket.
Purposely.
It's too much for me, because I'm like, we're in that same environment, but you won't speak to me.
If you saw him now, do you think you'd stop him, or do you think you'd probably just?
Yeah, I would stop him.
You would.
I think now I'm at a point where I can literally just go up to him and say, like, I need to speak to you. But I think back then it was very fresh. Like, I only found out who he was, like, physically in 2018. So that's like, what, 3-4 years ago?
A few years back.
Yeah, so I've been seeing him ever since, but we've never...
Oh, so you've seen him in passing multiple times?
Yeah, and like in his car, all these things.
How do you think you deal with seeing him, but then him acting oblivious?
I think because I see him, I don't see him a lot, but I see him, like, we live in the same town. Like, Dudley is a very small place.
Yeah.
And obviously I lived basically on the same street. So I think now, if he was to act oblivious, I'd just, you know what I look like, you know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so much you can run from.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of people are ignorant. Like, I don't know too many people in that situation, but if you've had a child, like, at least you owe it to them to explain yourself, at least your side of the story. Because all I've heard is my mum's side of the story, when I need to hear both people
Mm-hmm.
to get some sort of clarity. But I don't know if that will happen anytime soon.
Okay. So in terms of your mum's side of the story, was it like he just disappeared, or did he say, I can't?
I don't know, because it's not very, like, with my mum, she gets very upset talking about this type of stuff. So my family were not emotionally engaged, if that makes sense. Like, we're not the affectionate or this type of thing. So if I was to approach her and say, oh, I want to talk about this, she would kind of shut it out. But maybe that's a defense mechanism from her, because it was probably a very hard time for her. She had 6 kids at 26. So
Okay.
navigating that, you can't blame people for the decisions they make. But I think it would be nice to hear his side, because everyone's perception is different.
Yeah.
And maybe certain things did make it hard for him to come back, did make it hard for him to form a relationship. I don't know.
What do you think his answers could do for you?
I think they could just help me as a person grow. I think when you're younger, you literally, you want to know both sides of who you are. I still do now. I want to know, this is my mom. Like, I'm very into, like, my family history. So, like, I did, like, a 23andMe, and I would like to try to, like, trace stuff back. And I love, like, old photos and that stuff, because that's literally where you came from.
Yeah.
Like, I really want to travel to all the places that I've come from. So you're always interested in, like, my mom looks like this, my dad looks like this, my dad has this trait. Like, I come from this person. This is a whole other family.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even just him. It's my granddad, my nan, my uncles, my aunties, my cousins, my brothers, my sisters, like, nieces, nephews, whoever's out there that I've not, that it's been all taken away from me just because of a connection with one person.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's hard, because then I worry when I get, my brother gets to the point where he's going to have children and my siblings are going to have children, I'm going to have nieces and nephews, and they're going to get married, and I'm not going to be able to be at these events because my dad's going to be there. Family members are going to be there that's going to judge the situation. So it's kind of like, I definitely feel outcasted in that situation, because I'm like, you all get to have fun together, and I'm outside, but I'm literally a part of you, so
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense.
I get that.
Do you feel like that's the same? Do you have a connection with your dad's side of the family?
Fortunately, I do. So, I do, but I don't. So, growing up, it's like, I would feel like, let's say, my aunties and uncles didn't reach out, most of them. So, there's some that did. But for the most part, that side of the family, adult-wise, didn't really reach out. It's like my grandparents. We may get like a card or something every now and again, but again, it wasn't like a reach out thing. And then there would be like every Christmas, all my cousins and that would go to my grandparents' house, but we would never get invited to my grandparents' house. So it was like every Christmas it would be like, oh, we'll see like cousins doing up selfie pics with each other and all of that. But then we went there. So it was like that part of the family aspect wasn't there where it could have been, because everyone was aware of us. If we see them, it would be like, oh, you're right, nephew. It's like, relax. But so they were aware of us, so it could have happened. There was no reason why those things couldn't have happened. But on my cousin's side, unlike the youngest side, my age people and everything, it's cool. Like, my cousin is probably like, he's one of my closest friends. So he's the same one that I've done this podcast with before. So that's my cousin. Sisters, I'm close with them, everything.
Oh, so you have siblings from your dad?
From my dad's side, yeah. So I have 4 siblings from my dad's side, 2 brothers, 2 sisters. And then I have my brother who is both my mum and my dad.
Yeah.
But everyone else, good with. Like,
do you think that's because, like, do you think that they didn't reach out to you because your dad had passed, and I kind of saw him as the...
At this point, he didn't pass. So I think my dad probably passed maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they have no reason then, really?
Nah, there's no good reason.
Because I was going to say, maybe if he passed, they found it, like, hard to kind of make that connection with him without him being the middleman. Because obviously you're his children.
Yeah.
But even that isn't justifiable.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get what you mean. It's not... There's no justifiable reason for that.
Yeah. But so that's kind of what it's been. So they've always known, like, my grandparents' house was right next to my school.
Okay.
So, like, I remember, like, back in the day when my dad was still about, we'd go there every now and again. But then after that, I have no recollection of going there or anything like that. But luckily for me, I didn't miss that side of the family. The only time where I'd actually feel a way about things is like the Christmas thing.
When you'd see it.
Oh yeah. So it would be like, if there's an event and there's a picture of the event and it's like, my cousin who I'm close to, for instance, and all my other cousins, then I'd feel a way about that. But outside of those events and things, I didn't really miss it. I didn't really want for it. I've never wanted for my dad. Like, I've never had a feeling of wanting for him or wanting anything or talking or answers.
Do you feel like that's because your mom provided that for you? Or family members?
Maybe because up until 10, I had my granddad, and then my granddad passed. But then I've had my uncle. He lived in Nottingham for majority of my life for about the last 5-7 years. He's been in Birmingham, but I've always had him. Like I know if I want to go Nottingham, I can go Nottingham see my uncle. My uncle's got me basically. I know for a fact my uncle's got me. So it's like that's a father figure, and then it's like It's also a character like. Let's say I'm to do something mad rude and it gets back to my uncle. It's also that I don't want my uncle knowing. So it's like I've got that factor as well. In terms of that, I've had all bases covered. So I didn't feel like there's something I'm missing out from. And I think maybe most of my friends as well. Who were my friends? Yeah, I don't think I witnessed many dads playing active roles, even if they were. So it's like
It's
obviously my
kind of
cousin.
normal to you?
Huh?
Was it kind of normal?
Yeah, so I wouldn't even look at it like, dad's not being there and normal, because dads will be there, but it's just that I didn't see their role.
Yeah.
So it's like my best friend in primary school, his dad was in the house, everything, but I didn't see his dad's role. So I may more see his mum pick him up, same way my mum picks me up. I didn't really see many instances of, my friend's getting to do this with his dad and I don't get to do that with my dad. So maybe that part of it was never triggered in me because I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. I've always felt like I've got everything. And then for the first part of my life, I had my granddad as well. So I did have that male figure who was picking me up and doing whatever with. So yeah, luckily, I don't know how, because I would argue that my brother maybe don't feel the same way I do. And maybe he feels more of a way about things, which is interesting again, because we've grown up in same house, same mom, same family, same everything.
It's everyone's perception though. Like, even if I would talk to my sisters about kind of like dynamics, they would have a completely different take on it to me.
Yeah.
But I think it's just how you perceive it. And especially when you're a child with like that fragile mind, he might be more sensitive to a situation than you are.
Yeah.
You might get love in different aspects than he does. So yeah, he might see it in a completely different way, but you had the same experience.
Yeah. I feel lucky in that sense because I haven't had anything where I feel like there's anything I'm missing. So like, do you feel like you're missing like a part of you, or?
I think so. I think more so when I was younger, it affected me more because I didn't know, and it was the unknown for me. It was like, I don't have a dad and I don't know who he is. So I could literally, at the time, I probably did walk past him in the street. Like, so I think I did miss like having that, because obviously I have my mom. She's like a very good mom. She's a nurturer, all those things that a mother should be. But you don't have those aspects that a dad should have, like protection, all these things.
Yeah.
Even just like the masculine energy, like there was no masculine. We didn't grow up around no males really. Like my mom has a lot of brothers, but we only had like 2 uncles really in my life. So we didn't have no masculine energy. There's like 6 girls, like 6 daughters, and then 1 mom. Like, so I feel like growing up, I didn't know how to kind of have relationships with males, even if it was friends. I was just like, I could never trust them, like always on edge.
Oh really?
Yeah, I don't know why. It was just, but I feel like now I've got older, I've kind of understood that side and where it all comes from. But when I was younger, I was just like, no, it's weird.
Do you feel like there's still a bit of that now?
I think so, a little bit. Like, I'd react to certain situations. Like, I don't know. Like as I was growing up, my mum wouldn't even let me sleep around people's houses that had dads, because it was just like a red flag. She was like, no, males. So I think I was taught to always be scared.
Okay.
So obviously, and not because of the relationship I had, obviously with my stepdad and stuff, like there was always fear involved. So obviously growing up, when it comes to having my own relationships, I was just like, don't trust you, don't trust that, you can't protect me. I think that was just like more so me telling them that you can't protect me, like I can do that for myself, my mum can do that, like we're all independent. And I feel like that is very like toxic for a lot of females. They do it like, you can't protect me. I think that's like, I'm independent, I can do it on my own. But just accept that someone else can help you do that.
I get that.
But that obviously comes from not seeing a positive relationship, not seeing a man display that kind of like positive role. For me, if I was to go, like obviously now I've been in a relationship for like 6 years.
Yeah.
But when I was younger, like in secondary school, I was just very, I don't know, like very skeptical about people.
Yeah.
Even males, just in general, like when they'd come around me, I'd be like, I just didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
I was very like guard up, like I was young, but it was just very weird for me. Even just like, even teachers at school, I'd just be like, don't talk to me like that. You can't talk to me like that.
That's what you'd be like?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like
Male teachers?
male teachers,
Okay.
yeah. Because I think that authority from a male was never familiar to me. Maybe it was me being like deflecting, like, you can't talk to me like that. No male has ever spoke to me like that. So you can't do that.
Okay.
Now I'm more accepting of maybe there's things that men can bring that will tone, like calm me down and all this stuff and shape me into a better person. But because I never had that, it was hard for me to let in the beginning.
I get that. How did it feel having a boyfriend for like the first time?
My first boyfriend was in secondary school, which is obviously like
Yeah.
just silly stuff. But I think I was very, obviously when we broke up, you feel like you're going to die. Like in secondary school, you're like, what is happening? Like,
Yeah.
this is the end of the world. But I think that I was also so affected. Now I look back, I think I was very affected because it was someone leaving, especially a male. So I was like, oh, they're leaving again type thing.
Okay.
And I think I always liked to have the upper hand. So obviously when I was younger, I was like, I did get a lot of male attention when I was younger. And I liked the fact that I could have the upper hand and be like, no.
Okay.
Because I feel like that's when I was in control.
Yeah.
Like, no, you... And I think a lot of women do go through that phase when they're younger. They're like, you like the male attention, but you like being in control of it. So you can tell people, like, don't chat to me, this and this. But then I think when I got into my relationship now, I was a bit more understanding, like, I need to work on me as a person. Because when I first got into it, I was very immature. I was 15, so I was very, like, lost in the world. I didn't understand anything. You don't understand, like, intimacy, being, like, growing up in those situations. Because you're young, you're 15, like, you don't know anything about the world yet. And because I'd had that first encounter with, like, childhood heartbreak, as you call it, which is nothing of the sort, like.
Yeah.
But I was a bit like, oh, I can do, like, not do what I want, but everything I do is right.
Okay.
But then obviously now I've got older and I've understood, like, when you understand that intimacy level and connecting with another person, it's just different than the way your brain has, because you can be 100% sure that you're not self-destructing, like self-sabotaging this relationship.
Yeah.
But you are.
Yeah.
Just because of the traits that you've got through life, your coping mechanisms, the way you treat people. Like when I was younger, when I was angry, I was a very nasty person. So my immediate reaction would just be like shouting. Okay. But I think that is because that's what I got from when I was younger. That was like, I understood that situations were solved with shouting.
Okay.
But now I'm older, I don't shout.
At all?
Not really, no. Like, I would never let myself get to a point of, like, anger.
So what will you do to stop yourself from getting to that point?
You have to be rational. Like, it's not that deep. What has happened, like, fortunately, I haven't been in a situation, in my relationship now, I haven't been in a situation where he has overstepped any barriers that have made my, like, defences go up, which is good, obviously. But I feel like that is where I kind of look for problems. And I think that is obviously because I'm not used to those relationships.
Okay, that makes sense.